Hi, friends. It's Lisa Hetrick, illustrator for Gina K Designs, and I'm so grateful you could join me today. I have a fun watercolor card tutorial to share with you today. And holy smokes, look at all the supplies I have here on my desk. Here is the inspiration for the card today, and I'm going to walk you through how to create these washi watercolor flowers, and we're going to do a couple watercolor techniques. Now, all the supply links are listed down below, but I have an unusual supply that I'm using in this tutorial, and this is salt. So if you could grab some salt from your kitchen, we're going to be using it for our watercolor project today. Just super, super fun. Okay. I have a piece of Gina K Designs Blue Lagoon cardstock cut to an A2 size card, and I'm using some Canson watercolor paper. You can use your favorite watercolor paper. You don't have to use 100% cotton, which is my favorite and I always talk about. But I am just going to use the Canson watercolor paper that works really, really well with the dye inks that I'm going to be using for this technique. I am using my Fearless Joy stamp set, my newest release with Gina K Designs, and the companion dies that go along with the set. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into talking about watercolor techniques and this floral silhouette stamp that's in the Fearless Joy stamp set. So I'm going to be using the Karen brush markers for this technique, but I wanted to show you that you could replicate this technique with the Gina K Designs inks or any kind of other water-based ink. You can use distress inks, and you can see from the brush marker to the Gina K inks to the distress inks, you get different kinds of variations in the technique. And this is a super simple technique. I've done it many times before, but it's going to create some contrast and some difference in the florals that we're going to use for the bouquet that's going to go in the vase. So I just wanted to show you this little example of the varying colors that you can get depending upon how much water you add and the vibrancy that you can achieve using those brush markers. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm using the Karen brush markers. You could use Tombows, Zigs, Artezas, any kind of brush marker that's a water-based marker. The Karen brush markers are an intense dye-based ink. They call it liquid ink technology. What I love about them is they're really great for watercolor-based techniques for my paper crafting projects, and they're just really easy to work with. So I'm just literally brushing it on to my stamp here. And this is the silhouette version of the Biggest Bloom in the Fearless Joy stamp set. You can see that I am just spritzing it from quite a distance because the more color you add to the spritzing, the more watercolory the project is going to be. So you can see that I've got quite a bit of water there. I stamped it once, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp it again and just hold it there for a second so that the watercolor fibers of the paper can just kind of take in some of that ink. And then I just spritzed it one more time to stamp off again. So I didn't go back and add more color. And now I've got this variety and contrast in these three blooms. So I have a really intense darker one. I've got a second one that's just a little bit more, has a lot more texture around the edges of the petals. And the third one is super, super soft in color. And I'm just loving that contrast. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set those off to the side for a moment. Just let them dry as we move on to working on the vase for the card project. So I'm going to just go ahead and take this turquoise brush marker and just apply that to the edge. Instead of using a stamp ink, I'm just using the brush marker as my stamp ink. And I'm going to go ahead and stamp that down onto the watercolor paper. So after I've stamped that down, I'm just going to go ahead and grab my water brush. You could use a paintbrush with some water. You just need a paintbrush. So I just grab my water brush and I'm softening the edges of the vase. And you can see how quickly those Karen brush markers release their color. So they really do activate very, very well with the water. And now I'm just kind of sketching in a few lines here, and you can see that I'm working relatively quickly, even though I've sped this up a little bit for you. I'm just going in and I'm just adding some water to the Karen brush markers, and I'm just painting the vase. So I'm trying to get this kind of super watery, not too like wet, because this particular watercolor paper won't take that very well. But you can see that I've got it a little bit wet here. I'm going to bring it up to the camera and I'm just dropping in that Karen brush marker a little bit more, just dotting it in. And you can see that it's just kind of spider webbing out, which is, I love that. I love that when that happens with watercolor, it just kind of moves. So I'm just painting in the vase. It's really super wet. Now I'm going to add some of this. This is Celtic sea salt. You don't have to use Celtic sea salt, but this is some salt that I had in my kitchen. It does work better if you use like a chunkier salt versus like a table salt. So I'm just adding the salt to the vase, and I'm going to go ahead and let that dry. And it's going to create some really fun texture techniques for us. The salt reacts with the dye ink. You can also do this with your pan watercolors or your tube watercolors. It reacts and it's going to kind of oxidize it a little bit and just kind of create this really interesting texture in the vase. And it's just super easy to do. You can grab some of this salt from your kitchen and have fun with this technique. Okay, so now it's time to die cut out the 3 florals. So I'm going to just go ahead and put the die, the companion die, on these florals all 3 times and run them through my Platinum 6 die cutter. And here we go. Look at them. Oh, I just love these flowers. Look at the contrast in color. We have a bright, we have a distressed looking one, and we have a really interesting pastel-like flower. They're going to look so pretty when we put the card together. Okay, and again, I just wanted to pull these out just to kind of remind you of the different kinds of effects you can get from different kinds of dye-based inks and watercolor mediums. And with any kind of flower stamp that you have that's a solid, you can create this technique. You're applying the color and then you're misting the stamp and then you're stamping it out onto your watercolor paper to get all of these different varying effects. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at the vase with the salt. And you can see how the salt has reacted with the inks and it's created this kind of oxidized look in the vase, adding a whole lot of texture to the look and feel of this vase. I'm just digging it. Looks kind of like raindrops too. So I've just removed the salt and you can just kind of rub that off. If you want to speed up the process, you could also use a heat tool if you want to get that dried and move on. I'm just loving the way that looks. So I'm going to go ahead and use my use the companion vase die, run that through my die cutter as well. And look at this vase. I'm just loving this look, this turquoisey look. It's got a lot of texture in it. Okay, so I've pulled my card base, my watercolor card base, and I've cut that out with the Master Layouts stitch die. Just love that. Now I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to the background of this card base. First, I thought I was going to use the Karen brush marker, but then I decided to use the Gina K Designs Wild Dandelion ink. I love this ink. It's just such a pretty yellow, and you can see I've misted the paper and then I've just added some water to the dye ink. And I just love the watercolor effects that I can create with that wild dandelion ink. It's just so pretty. Okay, so now I was going to let it ride, but then I really thought about adding a little bit more texture and dimension to the background of this card base. So I went ahead and grabbed that diamond shape pattern builder stamp. I've got all my leafery over here on the right, and I'm going to definitely be using those. So I'm inking them up with some wild dandelion and just creating a little corner pattern here, just to add a layer of dimension without adding height. And so I've got a little background going here right over top of the watercolor brushed on wild dandelion. So just positioning that vase here just so I can see where I want to put the leaves and the greenery. And I'm inking up those stamps. I'm going to ink all of those stamps up individually, stamp them down with some fresh asparagus. So fresh asparagus is a really nice, deep, rich green that is going to add a lot of great contrast to the super bright colors that we have in the flowers and the vase. And I'm just digging it. I just love that color. It's also a really nice contrasting color to use with the wild dandelion. It's bold green, and it just gives you it just feels like spring to me and feels like a lot of leaves and greenery. So I'm just playing around here and just getting my positioning for the florals and the vase, and just kind of seeing if I like this composition and if I need to add a little bit more leafery. And I did. I totally needed to add a few more leaf elements. So I grabbed some Gina K Designs foam squares and just started playing around with the assembly of the florals on the vase, and just so I could get a nice look and feel of how the flowers would look with the vase and the leafery and the background. So just put some foam squares on the back and just pop those in, and took the whole card base and put it on the Blue Lagoon cardstock, really digging this layout. There isn't a ton of height to the card, but there's a ton of texture in the watercolor techniques and in the background techniques. So now it was time to finish off the card with a sentiment. And I kind of just went round and round a little bit about what sentiment I was going to use. And I decided to use the Happy Spring sentiment from this gorgeous, gorgeous set. So I'm just inking it up with some obsidian and stamping it down onto this banner element. I die cut this from one of the master layouts, and I love these banners. I used to hand cut banners all the time, and now I've got the master layouts die, so I just cut them out. Okay, so I've got a little of Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleedproof white. You could use any kind of white product that you have, a white watercolor. I just happened to see this in my stash, and I just wanted to play with it. So I've got a paintbrush here, and I've got a healthy, generous amount of this paint. And I'm just going to do a finishing splatter here and just get some splatters all over the place, just to create a little bit of extra pop of white with a little bit more dimension. And I'm just digging it. I love the way this card turned out. There's lots of character. There's lots of texture and dimension. We did a lot of different kinds of watercolory like techniques to create this look and feel. And yeah, I'm digging it, and I hope you do too. Okay, I also wanted to share that I do have a free card idea download. The link is in the description. I do this with all of my stamp set, and here is the one for the Fearless Joy stamp set. So I've got 8 card ideas on here. Some of them I showed you earlier because I actually stamped them, but some of them are brand new and just kind of showing you different ways that you can create a card layout with this stamp set. So super, super fun, and it's free to you. And again, the link is down below in the description. Thanks so much for watching. Please consider sharing the joy by liking this video and subscribing to this channel. And I'm sharing more card and watercolor tutorial videos for your inspiration right here. So come on in and take a peek at my tutorials. I have a lot to share, and I'll see you next time.